Like morning mist, gradually revealing a majestic mountain peak, God's timing unfolds with perfect precision in our lives. His wisdom orchestrates each season of waiting and revelation with divine purpose. Through valleys of uncertainty and mountaintops of clarity, He shapes our hearts and minds. Our Father's perfect timing transforms every delay into destiny, every pause into preparation. Each moment of waiting carries seeds of spiritual growth, waiting to bloom in His appointed time. Wisely, C.S. Lewis once noted, God's process of transforming us is like a master artist at work. Each stroke of His brush has purpose. In the sacred rhythms of spiritual growth, we often discover that our perceived delays are actually divine alignments. The potter's wheel turns deliberately, forming vessels of honor through patient crafting. Every season of waiting holds precious lessons that our souls must learn. Through this journey, we witness how God's timing proves perfect in every detail. In the quiet chambers of waiting, where faith deepens and character forms, we find ourselves drawn closer to God's heart. The psalmist reminds us, "Wait for the Lord, be strong, and take heart." Psalm 27:14. These seasons of divine pause aren't merely gaps in our journey, but sacred spaces of formation. Time in God's hands becomes a tool of transformation, shaping us for purposes beyond our current understanding. Each moment of waiting carries the fingerprints of His perfect love and wisdom. Children of the Almighty God, have you ever noticed how a seed, once planted, does not immediately break through the soil? It remains hidden, unseen, undergoing a process of transformation before it emerges into the light. So, it is with our spiritual lives. Waiting is not inactivity. It is the deep, unseen work of God preparing us for what is to come. Yet, in seasons of waiting, we often ask, "Has God forgotten me?" Waiting does not mean divine silence. The fact that we do not see movement does not mean that nothing is happening. Habakkuk 2:3 reminds us, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come." The fulfillment of God's promises is never rushed, but it is never abandoned either. His timing is not meant to frustrate us, but to prepare us. Wisely, C.S. Lewis once noted that God often works on us in ways we do not immediately recognize. Like a sculptor chiseling away at stone, He is shaping us into something greater, even when we feel unchanged. A tree must endure seasons before bearing fruit, and a soul must endure waiting before stepping into its calling. What if the waiting is not about delay, but about growth? Joseph's life is a testimony to this truth. He had a vision of leadership, yet his path led him through betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. If Joseph had received the throne too soon, he would not have had the wisdom to govern. Genesis 50:20 reveals his perspective. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." His waiting was not wasted. It was preparation. Could it be that your waiting is doing the same? Patience is not simply enduring time. It is trusting God's process. Psalm 27:14 exhorts us, "Wait on the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord." Strength is built in the waiting. Those who wait in faith do not grow weaker. They grow deeper. Each delay is an opportunity to trust, to grow, to prepare. God often withholds answers, not to punish us, but to refine us. A goldsmith does not remove the metal from the fire until all impurities are gone. Likewise, God keeps us in seasons of waiting to burn away fear, impatience, and self-reliance. What if the very thing we resist, waiting, is the tool God uses to prepare us for His greatest work? Many doors remain closed, not because God is denying us, but because He is protecting us. A child does not receive an inheritance before they are mature enough to handle it. God's blessings are the same, given at the right time to those who are ready. We may see the waiting as delay, but in reality, it is divine timing, ensuring we are strong enough to carry the promise. Faith is not proven in moments of clarity, but in seasons of uncertainty. To wait well is to trust that God's plan is unfolding, even when we cannot yet see its shape. Waiting is not wasted time. It is the fertile soil where endurance, wisdom, and spiritual maturity grow. The question is not whether God will fulfill his promise, but whether we will remain faithful until he does. Yet, waiting is not the only way God refines us. If time tests patience, trials test faith. And so, we must ask, what role do difficulties play in shaping us for God's purpose? A blade is not sharpened without friction, nor is faith strengthened without trials. Many pray for a deeper relationship with God, but resist the very challenges that refine them. Yet, wisely, C.S. Lewis once noted, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. Suffering, though unwanted, often becomes the loudest voice through which God transforms us. Could it be that the difficulties we seek to avoid are the very tools he uses to shape us? The Bible is filled with stories of faith forged through hardship. Abraham waited decades for his promise. Job endured unimaginable suffering. Paul faced countless trials for the sake of the gospel. James 1:2-3 reminds us, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Faith is not proven in comfort, but in endurance." Difficulties are not accidents. They are divine instruments of transformation. Like a blacksmith heating and hammering metal, each trial is a stroke shaping us for greater purpose. Without resistance, muscles weaken. Without challenges, faith remains shallow. Those who desire spiritual maturity must embrace the process, trusting that God wastes nothing, not even suffering. Joseph's life is a testament to this truth. Betrayed, enslaved, and imprisoned, he could have lost hope, but each trial was preparing him for leadership. Had he reached the throne without hardship, he would not have had the wisdom to govern with grace. What if the struggles we face today are merely training grounds for the blessings ahead? Perhaps God is not delaying his promise. He is strengthening us to carry it. Some view suffering as evidence of God's absence, yet it is often proof of his presence. A loving Father disciplines, not to harm, but to refine. Hebrews 12:6 declares, "The Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son." A faith untested is a faith unproven. Only through difficulty do we learn to trust God beyond our understanding. Resistance builds resilience. An athlete does not grow stronger by avoiding strain, but by pushing against it. Likewise, faith is exercised through trials. When we face loss, we learn God is our provider. When we endure suffering, we discover he is our comfort. Every hardship reveals a new dimension of his character, deepening our trust in him. Could it be that what we see as obstacles are, in fact, stepping stones? Some trials seem unbearable, yet God never allows suffering without purpose. He turns pain into preparation, loss into learning, and brokenness into beauty. Even when we cannot see his hand, we can trust his heart. Romans 8:28 assures us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." Faith is not about avoiding storms. It is about standing firm within them. The question is not whether challenges will come, but how we will respond when they do. Will we grow bitter, or will we grow stronger? Will we see hardship as cruelty or as refinement? Those who trust in God's wisdom see trials not as barriers, but as bridges to deeper faith. Each struggle is an opportunity to develop perseverance, spiritual endurance, and unwavering dependence on Him. Yet, trials are not the only way God shapes us. Sometimes His work is not through struggle, but through delay. Some paths remain closed, not because we are abandoned, but because we are being protected. And so, we must consider, what if the waiting we resist is actually God's mercy at work? A closed door is not always rejection. It is often divine protection. Many believers grow discouraged when plans do not unfold as expected, mistaking delays for denial. Yet wisely, C.S. Lewis once observed that we are not necessarily doubting that God will do the best for us. We are wondering how painful the best will turn out to be. What if the delays we question today are the very things shielding us from unseen dangers? The story of Joseph reveals the hidden wisdom in God's timing. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and imprisoned unjustly, it seemed as though his dreams had been shattered. Yet, each setback was not a punishment, it was preparation. Genesis 50:20 records his words, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Had Joseph ascended to power too soon, he would not have been ready. What seemed like delay was actually God's protection. We often pray for opportunities without realizing the weight of responsibility they carry. A premature blessing can become a burden if we are not prepared to handle it. Just as a tree must develop strong roots before bearing fruit, so too must we be grounded in wisdom and patience before stepping into God's promises. Sometimes the waiting is not about the blessing. It is about us becoming the person who can sustain it. Habakkuk 2:3 reminds us, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come." God's delays are not denials. They are divine appointments, waiting for their perfect moment. If we rush ahead of His timing, we risk losing what was meant to be a lasting blessing. Just as a child cannot drive a car before maturity, so too must we grow before we can carry what He has planned for us. Delays also serve as protection from paths not meant for us. How many times have we looked back and thanked God for not answering a prayer the way we wanted? What seemed like disappointment was, in hindsight, a rescue. A relationship that didn't work out, a job opportunity that fell through. Perhaps these were not losses, but mercies. God's no today is often His something better tomorrow. Spiritual maturity teaches us to trust in divine pauses. Instead of fighting delays, we learn to ask, "Lord, what are you preparing in me during this time?" David was anointed king as a young shepherd, yet he waited years before taking the throne. That waiting was not wasted. It was a season of refinement, preparing him to be a ruler after God's own heart. What if our delays are shaping us in the same way? Patience is not simply the ability to wait, but the ability to trust while waiting. Psalm 27:14 exhorts us, "Wait on the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage." Strength is built in the waiting. Those who resist the urge to rush ahead find themselves standing on a foundation of faith rather than frustration. To trust in God's delays is to trust in His character, His wisdom, His love, and His perfect plan. Many miss their destiny not because they lacked talent, but because they lacked patience. They walked away before the appointed time, mistaking a season of preparation for one of abandonment. Yet, those who wait on the Lord find that His timing is always precise. When the doors finally open, they step into their calling fully equipped, rather than prematurely exposed. But waiting is not meant to be passive. It is a time of strengthening. We do not simply sit and wonder. We persist in prayer, in seeking, in growing. Delay should not lead to spiritual stagnation, but to deeper dependence on God. And so, we must ask, how does prayer sustain us while we wait? A river does not carve through stone overnight. It does so through steady, persistent flow. In the same way, prayer is not always about immediate results, but about continuous trust. Many grow weary when answers do not come quickly, assuming God has not heard. Yet, Luke 18:1 reminds us that men ought always to pray, and not to faint. True faith is not measured by how quickly prayers are answered, but by how faithfully we continue to pray when they are not. Jesus illustrated this truth in the parable of the persistent widow. She did not receive justice because of her status or eloquence, but because she refused to give up. Luke 18:7 assures us, "Will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones, who cry out to him day and night?" Prayer is not about wearing God down. It is about aligning ourselves with his will. Persistence in prayer strengthens faith, deepens trust, and shapes our hearts to receive his answer in the right time. Wisely, C.S. Lewis once observed that prayer does not change God, it changes us. Often, what we perceive as divine silence is actually divine refinement. In the waiting, our motives are purified, our dependence on him grows, and our perspective shifts. We come to see that prayer is not merely asking, but abiding. The more we seek him, the more we understand that his presence is the answer before any circumstance changes. Psalm 27:14 exhorts us, "Wait on the Lord, be strong, and take heart, and wait for the Lord." Waiting in prayer is not passive. It is an act of spiritual strength. When we continue praying despite delays, we declare our trust in God's faithfulness rather than our own timing. Some doors remain closed because we have not yet persisted in knocking. How many breakthroughs are left unrealized simply because we stopped praying too soon? Prayer also transforms our perception of time. What seems like a delay on earth may be perfect timing in heaven. Consider Daniel, who prayed for understanding, yet his answer was delayed for 21 days due to spiritual opposition. Daniel 10:12-13. His persistence unlocked the breakthrough. Could it be that some prayers remain unanswered, not because God is unwilling, but because persistence is required to overcome unseen resistance? Persistent prayer does not mean repetition without faith. It means refusing to let go of God's promises. Abraham prayed for an heir for years before Isaac was born. Hannah wept in prayer before Samuel was given. Elijah prayed 7 times before the rain finally came. None of them received their answers instantly, but all received them in God's perfect time. If they had stopped praying, they would have stopped just short of the fulfillment. Some believe unanswered prayer means rejection, but Scripture tells a different story. God's delays are often divine preparations. Habakkuk 2:3 reminds us, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come." The prayers of today shape the victories of tomorrow. The question is, will we trust him enough to keep praying even when nothing seems to change? Prayer is not just about receiving, it is about becoming. As we persist, we are shaped into people of faith, endurance, and spiritual strength. Those who pray consistently do not just experience answered prayers, they experience transformation. When the breakthrough finally comes, they are not only grateful for the answer, but for the process that refined them along the way. Yet, persistent prayer is not the final step. Prayer prepares us, but preparation must lead to action. If we are praying for God's purpose in our lives, we must also be willing to walk into it when the time comes. And so we must ask, how does God prepare us for the calling He has placed upon us? A builder does not lay the roof before securing the foundation. Likewise, God does not place us in our calling before preparing us for it. Many desire to step into their purpose immediately, but spiritual growth takes time. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, "To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. Rushing ahead of God's timing leads to instability, but waiting on His preparation builds endurance and wisdom." Even Jesus, the Son of God, waited before stepping into His ministry. For 30 years, He lived in obscurity, growing in wisdom and favor. Luke 2:52 says, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and man." If the Savior of the world was not rushed into His calling, should we expect otherwise? God does not delay without reason. He refines, strengthens, and prepares. Wisely, C.S. Lewis once noted that God seems to do nothing of Himself which He can possibly delegate to His creatures. This means He shapes us through experience, trials, and lessons, rather than simply placing us where we want to be. The waiting season is not wasted. It is where character is formed. A calling without preparation is like an untrained soldier sent to battle. It leads to failure. Joseph's journey to leadership was paved with suffering. Betrayed by his brothers, enslaved and imprisoned, each hardship could have led him to despair. Yet, through it all, God was training him. When the time came for him to lead Egypt, he was not just a man with a vision, he was a man prepared by years of perseverance. Genesis 41:46 notes that Joseph was 30 years old when he stepped into his purpose, just as Jesus was. God's preparation often comes in unexpected ways. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading Israel. David was anointed king as a boy, but spent years fleeing Saul before taking the throne. Paul spent time in obscurity before becoming the apostle who shaped the early church. Great callings require great preparation. Those who try to bypass the process risk crumbling under the weight of their assignment. First, Peter 1:7 tells us, "These trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold. Just as gold is refined in fire, so too are we refined through waiting, trials, and obedience." Every lesson, every delay, and every hardship serve a purpose. The question is, will we embrace God's process, or will we resist His shaping? Many believe that preparation is about acquiring skills, but it is primarily about developing character. God is not as concerned with what we can do as He is with who we are becoming. A skilled leader without humility will fall. A gifted speaker without wisdom will mislead. The deeper the foundation, the stronger the structure. When God takes time to prepare us, it is because He is building something that will last. Those who submit to God's preparation emerge stronger, wiser, and more equipped to fulfill their purpose. But those who rush ahead often find themselves overwhelmed. God is not slow. He is precise. When He opens a door, it is because we are ready to walk through it. But preparation requires faith, trust, and patience. Will we allow God to complete His work in us before stepping into what He has called us to do? If waiting refines patience and trials refine faith, then preparation refines purpose. Each step we take in obedience brings us closer to the fullness of God's plan. And so, we must ask, when the time comes, will we be ready to step into the calling He has prepared for us? A delayed promise is not a broken one. Many grow weary in waiting, assuming that silence means absence, but God's plans unfold with precision, not haste. Isaiah 60:22 assures us, "At the right time, I, the Lord, will make it happen." Those who trust in His timing do not walk in frustration, but in expectation, knowing that what He has prepared will arrive exactly when it should. Wisely, C.S. Lewis once noted that patience is not simply waiting, but how we act while we wait. True faith does not demand immediate results. It trusts the unseen work of God. Like gold refined in fire, we are shaped through waiting, strengthened through trials, and prepared through prayer. And when the appointed time comes, we will not only receive the blessing, we will be ready to carry it. If this message has spoken to your heart, declare it in faith. Lord, I trust your timing. I will wait and not grow weary. Type it in the comments as an act of surrender. And if this word has encouraged you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. May we be a people who do not only seek God's promises, but who trust His process completely.